Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome to our continued look at the Battle of Khalkhin Gol from Princeps Games. This game covers the border skirmish between Japanese forces and Russian forces right at the dawn of World War II. In our first episode, we took a first look at all the components. In the second episode in the series, we're going to play through the first turn of a game. We're going to show how all of the features and all of the mechanics work. So by the end of this video, you should have a pretty good idea about how gameplay works. And then in our third video, we're going to come in and finish the rest of this particular game after action report style. Also, if you haven't entered the contest for a drawing for a free game of the Battles of Khalkhin Gol, there's a link down below in the description to the quick 3 questions that you need to answer on a Google form, and submit that and you can be entered into the drawing. The drawing, however, is only available for people in the contiguous 48 US states. Sorry for everybody that's watching from international locations. Let's get started on turn 1. So before we jump into the action of our first week of the battle, let's take a moment to set the tactical scene and talk a little bit about what some of the thinking might be for each side. To the right here, we have the markers for our 8 weeks of this campaign. What we're looking at right now is July 2nd, 1939. The battle is about to begin. Now, our most striking geographical feature in the map is the Khalkhin Gol River, which winds and meanders its way right down the middle of the battlefield, cutting it into 2 halves. To the west of the Khalkhin Gol River, we have the Russian forces and Russian-held Mongolia. To the east of the Khalkhin Gol River, in white, we have the Japanese forces and the Japanese-held Manchuria. And this area in here, just to the east of the Khalkhin Gol River, is the disputed territory. Russians say it's theirs, the Japanese say it's theirs, and that's what the battle's going to be over. Let's talk a little bit about victory, how each side can achieve victory in this battle. Mainly, again, this is a fight over this disputed territory in between Japanese-held Manchuria and Mongolia. And this disputed territory is designated by 9 checkpoints, these white flags, each one which have a political point value attached to them. For the Soviet Union to win, they have to cross the Khalkhin Gol River and occupy 5 of these 9 checkpoints without losing more than 2 of their own 6 checkpoints. If they do that and hold it to the next turn, the Russians win the battle. If the Japanese prevent that at the end of the 8-week campaign, the Japanese win the battle. There are 2 other victory conditions though. If the Russians can get a force up here to the Japanese base, Nomonhan, and take control of this base, they immediately get victory as well. The Japanese, likewise, the Russian main base down here is Tamsak Bulak in the lower southwest corner. If the Japanese can occupy that, they get victory as well. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of this here, because the way this setup is played out, it might be an interesting option for the Russians to try to make a run for that. Now, historically, just to kind of give a little background here, the Russians did win this battle. They had a much larger force than the Japanese, and it's signified in the game here with a slightly larger force pool for the Russians, and they are going to be on the aggressive, the Japanese a little bit on their defensive heels here. Russians did win the battle historically. An interesting footnote: Konstantinovich Zhukov was the Russian leader of the force down here, and he did receive a Hero of the Soviet Union for his actions in this campaign. Of course, his career went on to become the Marshal of the Soviet Union during World War II. Now, the game is going to come with a number of setups. You can make your own setups, but the game is going to come with a number of them that you can use for solitaire or use to randomize startup locations and things like that. And these were 2 that have come from Princeps Games that are a startup location for each side. Now, with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about the tactical situation here and think about what the thinking might be for each side. An important feature of the Khalkhin Gol River is that it's impassable, except for this ford here and this ford here. So we can see that the Russian forces have kind of assembled just to the south of this northern ford and just to the west of this southern ford down here. So one of the things we're thinking, we've got a very large Russian force down here, and they're going to get to go first and act. They get the initiative in that first turn. They're going to move first. Can we get them across the Khalkhin Gol River here, pushing across here in force to this first checkpoint? The Japanese, however, have a sizable defensive position here, so this could be an interesting battle that might determine to a significant degree which way the whole campaign goes. Likewise, we have a force in the middle here, and you might be wondering why. And the reason is that each side has the engineering capacity to build 2 bridges over the Khalkhin Gol River. So one thing that we can think of is, and it has to be an infantry unit, it only costs 1 movement point, but it does end their turn. So these units here have the capacity in the first week of the campaign, potentially, to build a bridge somewhere across this Khalkhin Gol River. It may depend on the weather and things too, because if the weather is inclement, it might not work. But the Russians potentially could get one or maybe even two bridges down here and start pushing this force across here. The Japanese, likewise, have a problem, right? Because we have one cavalry unit here and one infantry unit here defending this region. So this is an immediate threat. As the Japanese player, I'm thinking we are probably going to have to divert something to plug up this middle, because I know the Russians are going to come hard for this. And if they do that, potentially they can make a run all the way to Nomonhan. Now, in the north, the Russians, however, have a relatively weaker force pool than the Japanese. It's going to be tough for the Russians to push across the Khalkhin Gol. Got artillery, 3 infantry units, and an armored unit up here. They really don't have the force to be able to do that. So this might be a little bit more of a defensive position for the Russians, even thinking we might try to pull some of these units off to send them across through the central position here. Japanese up here, however, have a strength, an advantage to the north. One of the things I'm thinking, maybe, potentially, could we have the Japanese engineers build a bridge here, push across to this checkpoint, and come down? So a lot of this depends on how it's all going to play out, how the first battles go, but that's the general thinking. We want the Russians to push across here, hold, and perhaps reinforce down here for a greater thrust. Japanese have to figure out what they're going to do with these units and somehow plug this hole in the middle and hope they can fight to a standstill down here against the superior force in the south. Now we'll take a look at these areas more closely as we go forward, but with all that being said, let's get started now on our first turn. One last thing before we jump in and set the weather for the first week of the campaign. Let's take a look at our Russian commanders here. We've got an anonymous commander. He is an artillery value of 2. He is positioned in one of the artillery units at the headquarters in the northern force there, the weakest Russian force. The Zhukov, our armor commander here, he's down value of 4. He's down leading that one of the armored units in that southern force and at the headquarters down there. So he's in a good position to lead that attack. And then Choi Balsan is over in the infantry leader. He is a value of 3, the mediocre, if you would, the middle range leader here. And he's commanding one of the infantry units in the headquarters, stationed in the headquarters in the central Russian force there. For the Japanese, their 3 commanders, Masanobu Tsuji is leading artillery. He is in that northern force defending the northern ford. Ogisu Rippei is leading the armored unit down in the southern force, and then we have an anonymous infantry commander leading the weaker middle range area. So we're going to need to get him some support. And we'll talk about how these commanders work as we get into the game and get into the battle here. So almost all of the startup is taken care of. We've got our air bases that I'll show later and how they work. All of our units are in place for the first week of the battle. This battle is set to kick off. We do have to determine the weather for the first week. We're going to roll a 12-sided die here. We get a 9, which is rain. So rain is going to be clear terrain, and wetland hexes cost 1 additional movement point. Not good for the Russians that are hoping for speed here. So let's start the first week of our battle. Each week starts out with the revealing of an event card. There are 3 of these for week 1. Only one of them is in this game, so each game you can have a different set. Let's see what we get. We get event number 3 from July 2nd to July 9th. The result of it here is the impact on gameplay. So the general's ability does not apply to the Japanese artillery. So the Japanese artillery will go without their ability in the general. That is the one up north. Probably not a big deal, because I don't think the Russians are going to come across the river in the north in this first week, so probably not that harmful for the Japanese, even though it seems like it could potentially be. This historical context here details a failed Japanese armor attack during the first week of the battle that resulted in this commander, Yasuoka, being relieved of duty. So, historical context and the result, and we'll move on now to the next step. The weather is set and our event has occurred. Now it's time for us to do the air superiority phase of the first week. And this, we're going to use the advanced version because I want to show you this, because it's kind of its own little mini game as how this plays out. What we're looking at right now is the Japanese airbase strength battle mat, if you would. And there's a number of things here that we're looking at. Let's walk through it. The first, at the very top, we have the airbase strength, anywhere from 1 to 7, and this is the aircraft capacity, so maximum of 35. Now, I should say also that this mat, I understand, is being completely redesigned for the final version to make things like these boxes bigger and stuff like that. So what we're looking at here, as well as all of the stuff we're looking at, is a prototype version of the game. So there's some rough edges here here that are going to be different in the final version that comes out. But this is the total Japanese fighter capacity as it stands right now. I've just put the box above it to indicate we're at 14, and then right above it to indicate we're at 12. So Japanese have 14 fighters and 12 bombers here. Then our anti-aircraft strength, we have 3 units of anti-aircraft. As a Japanese, we can put these either on airbase or supply lines, but everyone starts their aircraft, the anti-aircraft is on airbase for the first week because you can't attack supply lines during the first week. Then down below here we have this column. This is going to be used in a number of places to determine air superiority, determine the results of attacks on supply lines, and determine the results of attacks on air bases. And we'll see how this works as we get into it a little bit deeper. That's the Japanese card. The Russians, if we go up here, have an identical mat, and they have identical starting aircraft strength. So the bases are at full capacity. They have 14 fighters and 12 bombers, 26, which is 9 under the maximum capacity, 3 anti-aircraft units, and they're all on the air base right now. And likewise, a chart for them for the air combat results and things. So what do we do next, you wonder? So if you're playing this 2-player, we bring into play now these cards here. And each player starts the game with 9 of these cards. And this is the Russian deck, and they're numbered from 0 to 9. So you've got 1 of each, 0 to 9. Japanese, likewise, have a set 0 to 9. Now, if we're playing this 2-player, you would then choose which one of these cards you wanted to play. The bigger number is the better, indicating you want to put more emphasis in your air combat and more fuel and more supply and more resources into winning the air battle for this week of the combat. However, once you use a card, it's gone for the rest of the battle. And so you can only use them once. So you're trying to decide, do I want to go for air superiority early or late? Do I want to save my air resources? There's a little bit of some tactical thinking there. Because there's one extra card, there's also an option if you're playing 2-player to kind of have a little bit of an additional card play, but you can only do that once in a game. So if you really want to win a week, you can say, I'm going to add one more card here, but your opponent might do that as well. So when you want to use the extra card or not use the extra card can be somewhat of a tactical decision. That obviously doesn't work if you're playing it solo. And there is a bot system that allows you if you're playing against another player, but I'm playing both sides now. So just to keep it simple, I'm going to pick out one card from each deck, and that's going to determine how much emphasis is on here. So first, we'll take a look at the Japanese deck, and they get a 5. So medium amount, somewhat high amount of air resources to this one. Let's see what we get for the Russians now. I'm going to flip this over for them. Be nice to have air superiority on the first time. A 0. Okay, so they've burned through their weakest card, which is not necessarily horrible. Japanese have burned through a middle one. Now let's see who gets air superiority based on this result. So let's see how this battle for air superiority played out. We can imagine the Japanese committing more resources. They're going to get the edge here, and that's actually what's going to happen. We take the Russian airbase strength, which is 7, and we add the fighters to get a number of 21, and that's going to be the column that we use here. So we're going to use this column 21, 2021, and then over here we have the row. I confess I'm not 100% sure what you do with a 0 result, because the lowest number is 1. I'm assuming we're going to just use the 1 result, and if we come over here to row 2021, we can see that the Russian strength for this battle was a 7. Let's calculate the Japanese strength. Japanese at this moment have the same resources, 7 and 14, which is 21. Looking at the same column, but coming down to the number 5 in this column, we can see that we end up with 11. So the Japanese have air superiority here. Now, if you were playing and bidding these cards, you determine one player would have the initiative, and that player has the option of adding one card once in a game. So theoretically, the Russians could say, well, we're going to play one more card and play it. Or the Japanese, and there's a little bit of back and forth as to how those are played. But again, for the sake of doing this solitaire, I'm just going to use the numbers that are picked out, and we're just going to deal with the air superiority results that happen. But Japanese now have 11, Russians have 7. Japanese have won the air superiority battle for this first week. Immediately what you do in that case is we're going to go back up to the Russian mat here, and we are going to subtract the loss of 1 fighter. So they are down to 13 fighters. Now, normally in the air superiority battle, once you win it, you have the choice to do a number of things. We're going to put the 0 card and the 5 card off to the side. They are out of the game. But you have 3 choices. You can either use it as to enhance your attacks during the turn, or you can use it to attack the enemy air bases, or you can use it to attack the enemy supply lines. In turn 1, the only thing you can do is attack the enemy supply lines, so that's what we're going to have attack the enemy air bases, so that's what we're going to have the Japanese do. Now there are 3 anti-aircraft guns devoted to the airbase here for the Russians because they're all there. However, there's one other additional thing that we're going to bring into play here, and that is the airstrike cards. When you win air superiority battles, you can pick out any one of these cards. They have various offensive and defensive results to them. I'm going to pick one out for the Japanese here now that we might be able to use in this first turn here. This is the card we're actually going to use, and I'm going to play it here. So the Japanese have picked this air strength card, and if it gets there, if your bomber gets hit by enemy anti-aircraft fire, you can re-roll the opponent's die for 1 time. So the Japanese are going to pick this card. I don't know if we're going to use it or not, but we're going to pick it and bring it into play. So now what happens is the Japanese bomber strength is identical to the Russian strength, which is a 12. And the Japanese bomber looking on it is a 12. We're going to have 12 bombers come over, but each time the anti-aircraft can fire. So these anti-aircraft guns can fire 3 times on a D8. In order to hit a bomber and take one out, they have to roll a 1 or a 2. And we do have this card that we can play as the Japanese. If your bomber gets hit by any aircraft fire, make them re-roll. So let's see how the Russians do. They get 3 shots. They get a 7, which is a miss. They get a 4, anti-aircraft not doing very well, and an 8. Terrible shooting by the Russian anti-aircraft guns. All of the bombers have gotten through. We didn't need to use our bomber cards, so we're going to hold that for the Japanese. And now we get to figure out what happens when the bombers get through on the base. So the Japanese bombers have gotten through the anti-aircraft fire. Now we actually have to see if they destroy the Russian airbase capacity. This is going to be both sides rolling a die depending upon the airbase defense values and the bomber strength, the bomber numbers. And so let's do the Japanese here first. First up, Japanese have 12 bombers, so we're going to use this column right here, and we're going to roll, and we're going to see what we get. So we're rolling 8-sided die for the Japanese. They get a 2. That's not very good. So the Japanese get a 2 with 12 bombers, gives us a value of 3. The Russians have to beat that number in order to be able to defend their bases here. Let's see what we've got. The Russian defense base strength here is 7 for the air bases and then 3 for anti-aircraft, giving a value of 10. So it should be relatively easy for the Russians to come out ahead with this one. They get a 4. Under 10 gives them a 4. So the Japanese number, which was a 3, is less than the 4. The Russians have successfully defended their air bases, and the Japanese do not reduce the capacity. If they did, the Russians would have had to drop their capacity down from 7 to 6, and this would limit the total number of planes they can have, as well as reduce their overall air base strength. That didn't happen, and they still would be under 30 aircraft anyway, but Japanese aircraft fail on the air superiority round, and that ends the first round of air superiority combat in week 1. So the air superiority phase is over. It's time to go into the Russian movement and combat phase. What we're going to do is I'm going to take each section of the map in thirds here, and that'll be a good way for us to see it. We're looking now at the southern sector. The goal of this Russian force led by Zhukov is to get across the fort as quick as possible. The rain will hinder them here, but they should still be able to make it across because we want to get across in force and put a lot of pressure on these Japanese defenders here. Before we do that though, let's just do a little refresher if you haven't seen the first video about how the combat strength and what some of the numbers are on these counters. There are 5 different types of counters in the game. We have headquarters units, which have a command radius of 6 hexes, which is also limited by zones of control and things like the Khalkhin Gol River. You can't extend supply across rivers. So we're going to need to keep this attack force within 6 hexes of our headquarters here in order for them to be effective. There are also artillery units which have a range of 4 hexes, so they're firing at range. We have infantry, armor, and then cavalry. Cavalry relatively rare for the Russians and Japanese in this battle, but they do exist. Now, let's take a look at each one of these units, the counters themselves. Top left is the attack value. So an attack value of 2, defense value of 3 for the Japanese infantry. Movement points are in the bottom left, 14, 14, and we can see the different movement points. Armor faster with an 18 and such. And then this is just the designation that this is the Russian unit. Also notice here on this armored unit we have a medal here. This dictates that General Zhukov is commanding this unit. This unit gets his general's bonus. That means whenever we roll him, and he has an armor value of 4, whenever we roll an 8-sided die, if we get anything less than a 4, it's automatically elevated to a 4. So they can never get less than a result of a 4, which can be pretty handy in pivotal battles here. Let's also take one last thing here. Stacking limit, you can only have 1 type of unit in a hex, and the stacking limit is 5. And let's talk a little bit. I'm going to just explode these units out, and I'm going to talk a little bit of how we calculate the attack attack strength and defense strength for a unit. So at the beginning of the game, each unit starts at full strength, which is 5 stacks, 5 units, 5 counters high. And the way you calculate the attack strength for a unit is you count the number of units in the hex, so in this case 5, and you add the attack value to it, 2, so we get 7. So this infantry unit has an attacking value of 7 and a defensive value of 8. That's all there is to it, very simply. Now, you can split these units up as you move along, and that's going to be one of the tactical considerations we have to think about, especially for the Japanese on defense, is to what degree we want to split our units up to kind of hold the line, and to what degree we want to keep them together to make them strong. You can willingly, intentionally only break a unit down to a strength of 2, which is 2 units, so you can't spread 5 ones out. The lowest you can go in terms of reducing the strength of a unit on your own volition. It could be broken down by combat, mind you, but of your own volition, you can only take it down to a 2. And now it's time for us to launch our Russian offensive. I'm going to show a little bit of movement here, but then for the most part, I'm going to move the rest off camera here. We want to push these forces across the river. We don't want to let the Japanese to be able to come up here and clog up our movement across the ford. So it's almost like a beachhead. We want to try to get these units as quick as possible. Now, we know it's raining, which means that these clear hexes and these wetland hexes have a +1 movement allowance cost to them. Normally, wetland hexes cost 3 and clear hexes cost 3 as well, but they're going to be 4 for this turn. We have some highland grass here. And again, we can't cross the Khalkhin Gol River except going across at these ford points. But let's get our lead infantry across. Movement across the road is 2. We can see this infantry has a movement value of 14. I'm going to pull them out here, and then let's get them going here. So we can go 2 here, 4 here, 6 here. Crossing a ford is an additional 2, so that is 10 to get here. Now, the Japanese artillery has a range of 4. I think we're going to have to bring something into range, but I want to try to not do it immediately. Because we can get this unit off here into the wetland, let's push them off into the wetland here. That's 4 points, expending all 14 movement points. Let's do now our armored unit here with General Zhukov. We'll get him going. Down the road is a 2 for this case, so he is moving forward. Let's go 4, 6, 8, 12, because it's 2 additional to cross there. Unfortunately, the rain, if this was 12, he has 6 more movement points. If it weren't raining, he could get up here, which would be a bigger threat. It is raining, so it costs 4, which is 16, and that's the end of his movement. I don't want to put him here because I don't want this artillery. Artillery fires and then moves. You can only fire before you move artillery. So if we stay out of range, the Japanese artillery won't be able to hit us here. But this rain is slowing us down. I'd love to be able to get this armor up here and push farther through, but not to be here. I'm going to move the rest of our Russian units forward here, and then we'll take a look and see what it looks like. Russians on the move. We've been able to get our Zhukov's armor across the ford and pushing north here a little bit. I did push this infantry a little bit out. This artillery will be able to strike it, but I want to get somewhat of a bubble beyond the ford here. I held the rest of the units back because I want to give these units a chance to retreat if the Japanese do counterattack, which I would do, because the more we can bottle the Russians up here trying to get across the ford, with the more time we're going to save. So I think it makes sense to be aggressive as the Japanese and see if we can push some of these units back. Not the greatest. That the rain really hindered us. It just made like 1 hex difference in a lot of places. The rain really putting the Russian offensive off to a slow start. Let's move to the central zone. So the rain really impacting the Russian offensive, because I played this once before with the same setup here, and it was clear weather. And the Russians, this infantry unit can go 4, 7, 10, 13, use 1 movement point to build a hex here, and the Russians are across the Khalkhin Gol River here. But with the rain, they can't get there. So the offensive off to a slower start here. I'm going to do the best I can and move these Russian units up in a position to threaten this central zone, though. Russian force in the central zone here has at least gotten up to the edge of the Khalkhin Gol. We should be able to build bridges across here or somewhere. The Japanese don't have enough units to really defend this area, so still threatening, but it's going to delay us by it's going to delay us with this rain. To the north, our relatively weak Russian force, if we take a drone up here and take a look at our Japanese forces to the north, we can see they outnumber us and they're stronger. So I don't think it makes sense to push across here, but at the same time, we can't abandon this for the Japanese to pour down from the north. And we also, if we look a little bit to the west of the Khalkhin Gol River, we have 1 Soviet checkpoint here, which potentially these infantry could come and build across and threaten. So I'm not quite sure how to handle this as the Russians, but I do think we're going to go on the defensive up here. And I don't think we need all the units we've got. And so I think with the weak Japanese central position, we're going to take this armor and divert it south, and then take somewhat of a defensive position up in here to guard either to the checkpoint to the west or guard the ford here to make sure the Japanese don't come down. So relatively simply, I think what we're going to do is we're going to move this infantry here. Let's move this infantry here. That would be 8 to get there. We'll pull our artillery up to cover them right down here. And there is zones of control. Once you move into an enemy unit zone of control, you have to stop for that turn, and then you can attack if you have enough movement points to get into it. I'll talk about that when we look at attack. So we're blocking this pass right here and giving us some mobility to go west if we need to. I'm going to take this armored unit, however, and move it away. We're going to leave our headquarters right up here in the mountains for right now, leaving everybody in supply. So let's get our armored unit moving down south. We head straight east. We can go 4, 8, 12, 16 right here, and that's the end of it. Again, the rain impeding us a little bit, but we've now got it under the headquarters down here, and we've strengthened our central force. With luck, if we can get the bridges built early in week 2, maybe we can get some armor across the Khalkhin Gol, pushing into the heart of the Japanese Manchurian-held land there. That brings us to the end of the first week of the campaign for the Russians, and we have the Japanese response to go through. Defending in the north, pushing to the banks of the Khalkhin Gol in the center, and then across the Khalkhin Gol in force down in the south. The biggest threat perhaps, although this is a threat as well. We'll let the Japanese reply momentarily, but we have one thing left to do, which was to give the Russian force their political points for the first week of the battle here. Now if we look on the outside, we can see these numbers that go 1 to 50, and it's really small, you can't see it. The Japanese marker is on the number 25, the Russian marker is on the number 26. This is how many political points you get. Basically, it's kind of money that's going to be used for reinforcements and supply. It's kind of a whole supply and resources that are going to come to the front that are going to help you in the battle. And it is dependent upon the value of these checkpoints that you hold. So the Russian total for the 6 checkpoints that they hold is 26. The Japanese total for all of the ones that they hold, including the disputed ones, is 25. The end of the Russian first week, they still hold all 26 of their own value points. They've taken none of the Japanese ones, so they're going to get 26 of these basic monetary units, signifying kind of supply and resources. So these are 26 of these coins. I'm going to put them by the Russian side here so we know that they've got them, and then we will be able to use those to get reinforcements and other things as the battle goes on. That ends the Russian turn for week 1. Now let's go to the Japanese turn. So thinking as the Japanese player, if we're down here in the south, also for the sake of showing some combat, we're going to have this Japanese force be aggressive. We've got them, with the rain and the weather here, the Russians didn't get as far as they probably could have. I think it's a chance for us to really bottle up and delay this force down in the south, so we're going to do that. Over here, we don't have enough to stop them. I'm very concerned as the Japanese player that if they can build bridges here and here, they're going to get this armor across. They could be pouring north towards the base here very quickly and end the campaign, perhaps in the first few weeks here. Because with a movement of 18, if they get on a road, they can go 6, 3, 6, 9 hexes. They're like 2 weeks away from Nomonhan, which would be problematic. So we need help. Right here in the middle here, this central area is our anonymous Japanese commander, and he needs help. So we're going to try to divert, I think, some forces from up here and maybe just let this sit as a stalemate. And I think we might also divert some infantry down here, but we got to plug this hole. So let's get busy. Looking closely down at the south, let's give the Russians here a hard time as the Japanese. This artillery actually is in range. I think our goal is going to be to move forward as quickly as we can and try to set up a defensive perimeter here, plug these units up, if possible, drive some of these back and inflict casualties. So with that in mind, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to have this artillery here fire on this infantry unit. It's a range of 4 and it's just in range. So let's zoom in and take a look at this combat. Combat in the game is very straightforward. We're going to calculate the attack value of the Japanese, of artillery here and the defense value of the Russian infantry, and then we're going to compare that ratio and roll a die on the combat results table. Very few die roll modifiers. Generals can influence the battle, but the generals unit is an armor unit here for the Russians, so it's not impacting the artillery fight. Die roll modifiers for terrain can apply. Generally, they're -1 for enhanced defensive terrain. Interestingly, wetland is not considered enhanced defensive terrain, so there's no die roll modifiers on this attack. We're going to calculate the value of the Japanese artillery. We already know how to do that, right? We know there's 5 units in the stack because it's at max value, and the attack strength is 4. 4 plus 5 is 9. Defensive strength of the Russian infantry is 3. We know there's 5 units there, so a defensive strength of 8. We're going to look on the combat results table and find that ratio here, which is 9 to 8. Now we're going to roll an 8-sided die, and whatever the result is, we're going to read across and get it. We get a 7. High numbers are good for the attackers. The Japanese artillery dialing it in. We can see if we go across on a 7 here, we get a dash, and then a hyphen, a dash, a slash, and then a 2. So 2 means 2 defensive losses for the Russian unit here. We're going to reach in and pull those off. They are gone. Very effective in punishing artillery fire by the Japanese. Now this unit could move after this now because it's artillery. I'm actually going to leave it there because I think it's... Yeah, let's move it up a little bit here, though. Let's push it to the north. There's a movement of 11, 4, and then 8 because of the rain. So we'll push it right over here, and this unit is done moving. Now, let's think about what we want to do next. We've got this Russian infantry unit, the vanguard of their attack here, on the defensive and have inflicted heavy casualties with the artillery here. Let's start throwing... I want to put some infantry here to plug this armor up, so it's going to take it 1 turn, and then it's going to take 2 turns to get by, so hopefully we can kind of think of some other ways to beat up this armor here. This is Zhukov himself leading that unit, so we want to stop him from going crazy behind our enemy lines here. Okay, so what we'll do then is I'm going to move this artillery just out of the way for a second. We're going to move our infantry up here, 4, 8, 12. Now, interestingly enough, this unit even right now, it could not attack because in order to be able to attack, you have to have enough movement. The attack is considered to happen in the defender's hex, so it has to actually have movement points enough to go into the enemy's hex in order to be able to calculate the attack. It's at 12. It would need 4 because of the rain. That would be 18. It exceeds its value of 16. It exceeds its value of 14, so it cannot attack. So we're just going to have it hold here in this high grass, which is actually a good defensive position, hopefully plugging up Zhukov's armor from breaking out behind our lines. Okay, let's keep going. This unit is too far away to attack anything in here because it would need 16 movement points because of the rain. However, this infantry unit here has enough. We can have it move. Oh, it's got the roads actually. I take that back. It might be okay. But we're going to push this one forward anyway. 2, 4 down the road, and then it has 6 to attack into that hex. So we're going to have the infantry attack the infantry right on here now. So our attack value is 2. It's a strength of 5. So 2 plus 5 is 7. Defensive value is 3. Now it's down to a 3, which is 3 stacks in the unit, so it's 6. So it's 7 attack factors against 6. Let's roll and see how our Japanese infantry do in their first combat here. They get a 2. That's not a greatest result. There's no combat modifiers here. So we get 7 against 6. A 2 is defender retreat. That's not ideal perhaps for either side. It's a 1 hex retreat. Let's move these out of the way. Push these infantry back here, and the Japanese, however, actually take that hex. Actually, that's pretty good, right? Because we are bottling up this Russian offense in here. So let's get our Japanese units in here to hold that up. I'll sort these out in a second here. Russian attack is floundering across the Khalkhin Gol to the south here. That's actually an excellent result for the Japanese. Now we have our other infantry here to decide what to do with. We've got artillery, and then back just a little bit to the east, if we pan our drone camera over here, we can see we've got the Japanese armor too. So let's figure out what we want to do. So push the Japanese infantry up here. They don't have enough strength to attack here, but that's okay because they're weaker on attack. So we'll make the Russian our infantry attack here. We've pushed our armor up in kind of a position to adjust either way. I'm still afraid of Zhukov's armor here. And then I brought this artillery unit up. In the next second week, they'll have dialed in positions to hit all of the units that have crossed the Khalkhin Gol. Very good, I think a very good result for the Japanese here in week 1. They've thwarted the attempt, pushed the vanguard back, inflicted casualties on this Russian infantry, driven them back to the ford here. So Russian offensive here in the south stalled out with the rain not helping and some ferocious Japanese counterattacking to hold them steady. Let's take a look at the central and the north. In the center, we have a problem. We've got to plug this gaping maw in our Japanese defensive lines. And we know they can build bridges all across here and come pouring across. They could build it here, they could build it here, they could build them here, they could go down here, build one here, and then pour their armor across pretty quickly. So I think we have to try to get our cavalry down around in here, this high grass maybe. Let's do that. So 2, 4, 6, and 4 for high grass, I believe is, yeah, 10 is right there. That's good. If the armor comes across, oh, that's good. They could still come across here though, right? 3, 6. No, they're not going to get that far. So I think we're okay there for right now. Let's get our infantry down into the high grass over here. So this is 2, 4, 6, 10, 14 right here, and they are in high grass right there. And now what I also want to do, I want to move this headquarters to the maximum range to keep this cavalry in supply. So right here, so we'll go 4, 6, 8 right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's still in range, of keeping this in range. That will allow us to bring a unit down from the north, couple units down from the north, and get them here to try to help outplug this hole. So let's go to the north and see if we can shift Japanese resources in this direction. So with the rough idea that the center needs help, I want to try to get this armor up here and then in range of these headquarters here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It might not work this way. Well, we should be able to. Okay, that's 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 16, 18. Okay, so we'll leave it in supply of this headquarters and it can jump to it next time. Okay, so let's get our armor going here. We get 4 for the clear, 6, 8, 10, 12, 16, 18. It is right here, pouring to the east to head down to the south to help plug our center. Let's do likewise with this infantry here. Straight on the road, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Oh, I can't stack through there, so that goes there, and it's still in supply. That's good. Let's leave our infantry here. We're going to move them. Let's actually move our artillery up so they can maybe pound these units in the woods. I'll figure out something. I'll move something here and then we'll get going. All right, so we've pulled this Japanese infantry up to the ford here to block it, brought the artillery in range here to potentially fire at these infantry, at least push them back. I've sent this Japanese infantry unit over the edge here because maybe we can build a bridge and cut across here and capture this checkpoint, which would again have the impact of reducing the Russian political points here, which would be good. Now we have to be careful about supply because you can't trace supply across the Khalkhin Gol River. You'd have to trace it across the bridge in there. But right now everything's in supply. We've got reinforcements rushing to the south. We've got this relatively plugged up. Japanese turn is done. So that brings us to the end of the first week of the battle. We've given the Japanese their political points. They have 25. I've put those off to the side. That allows them about roughly 25 units worth of resources to rebuild and reinforce. And that happens in week 3 of the battle. It does not happen on every turn. So we'll see how that goes as we get closer. But the rain causing problems for the Russians. They got blocked up and plugged up down here. They couldn't get across, and a vicious Japanese counterattack just driving the Russians back to the banks of the Khalkhin Gol and stymieing their offense. A lot of firepower down here for the Russians though, and they'll be able to bring their artillery to bear in the next week. So it's not done yet by any means here. This is still a precarious position for the Japanese. They've got reinforcements pouring down from the north, but the Russians again held up in getting the bridges built on the first week. They'll be able to get them built next week. The question is, can they get across, perhaps get the home run, head for Nomonhan and win the battle in a couple of weeks here? It's going to be up to the Japanese to plug that hole. In the north, we've got a stalemate. Brings us to the end of this turn. We'll be back in the next episode. I'm going to play out the battle after action report style, 1 week at a time. We'll go through all the remaining 8 weeks of the campaign, and I'll show anything that we didn't show mechanically now, like strikes on supply lines if we get those, and then also how we allocate political points. So a little bit more things to explain and show, but we've seen most of the core and fundamental mechanics of movement and combat, of the air combat and air-based attacks, and some of the things in supply and stuff like that. Let me know if you have questions down below. I'll put a link to the next episode as soon as it is ready. Thank you for watching.